Yeah, it's 6:30. So our Toastmaster is Han. Han, you can take it.
Thank you, Ethan. Hello, fellow Toastmasters and our honored speaker, Stewart. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Stewart Murrie because I participated in his storytelling workshop twice. The second time I was there just so that I could listen to the Hogwarts story all over again. That was fantastic. And I look forward to his new workshop on the magical mindset. Stewart Murrie, magical mindset.
Thank you very much, Cheng. Thank you very much, everyone else. It's wonderful to be back here at ASML Toastmasters. I hope you're all doing well. Let me get the screen share going. All right, hopefully everyone can see the screen now. Let me just rearrange all my windows so I can see what's going on. All right. And then let me move this out of the way and we'll be all set. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming to this workshop. My name is Stewart Murrie and it's my great pleasure to be talking with you today about our mindset. Now, even though this workshop is going to be done over Zoom, I still want to try to make this as interactive as we can. And so there are a couple of things that I would invite you to do. Firstly, there will be some opportunities for you to work on some exercises as we go throughout this workshop. So you may wish to have either a pen and paper handy or to have a document open on your computer so you can take some notes. Secondly, please do use the chat feature to ask questions. There will be places during the presentation where I'll pause to see if there are any questions. And I'll also be asking you some questions as we go throughout, and you can type your answers into the chat window as we go along. And this workshop probably will take about an hour, just about. I'm happy to hang around afterwards if people have time and if they want to ask more questions after the workshop concludes. So I'd like to start with a little story about a man named Ernest Jones. Ernest Jones was a British golfer in the early 20th century, and he was one of the most successful golfers of his generation. In 1913, at the age of only 25, he was made the head professional of the Manchester Golf Club in England. And 10 years later, he was made the head golf professional at the Women's National Golf and Tennis Club in New York City, a position that he then held for over 35 years. He won several tournaments as a professional player, and he was even more respected as a teacher, with many of his students going on to become champions themselves. By any measure, you would say that Ernest Jones was a successful golfer. But there's something you should know about Ernest Jones. He only had one leg. He lost his other leg fighting as a soldier in the First World War. Now, I play golf myself sometimes, and I'm pretty terrible at it, and I have two working legs. And so I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for Ernest Jones to have to completely relearn his sport and to even be more successful than he was after he lost his leg than he had been before. So let me ask you a question. What words come to mind when you think of Ernest Jones? What sorts of words would you use to describe him? Why don't you chat some of those words into the chat window right now? Tell me what sort of words you would think about. Amazing, yep, I like that for sure. Perseverance, very good, yep. What else? Determination, I like that one, very much so. Resilient, yeah, these are all great words. Here are some that I came up with. Earnest, I mean, it's right in his name, right? Ernest Jones. Determined, gritty, resolute, accomplished, gifted, brave, talented, all very good words to describe Ernest Jones, the golfer. let me tell you about another young man. Now, this young man was pretty smart. He was quite intelligent, but he never really lived up to his potential. He did okay in school, but a lot of his teachers would write comments such as, he has ability, but he must try harder, or he gives up too easily when he gets stuck. He did well in some subjects that came naturally to him, like music and science, but in other subjects like art and history, he really didn't try very hard at all. When he got a good grade, he would pat himself on the back and say, yes, I'm really good at this. But when he didn't get a good grade, he would say, well, it's not my fault. The teacher was no good. Whenever his friends did something good, he would feel jealous of their success. They must be so talented, he would say to himself. I wish I was that lucky. What sort of words would you use to describe this young man? Type them into the chat. Excuses, doubts, I like those. Lazy, sure. Half-hearted, yeah. Surrenders, yeah, it gives up easily. Exactly, yeah, I came up with pessimistic, perfectionist, a shirker, weak-willed, a quitter, a dropout, easily discouraged. So Ernest and this young man are two quite different characters. They seem quite different to me. My question for you is, when do these differences really show up? At what points in their lives do we really get to see these differences between these two gentlemen most evidently? Think back to their stories. Did you notice anything about how they handled themselves in different situations? It seems to me that the real place where the differences between Ernest Jones and the young boy showed up was when they faced some kind of challenge, some kind of setback. Ernest Jones lost a leg, and he was a professional sportsman. He was an athlete. One of the most devastating setbacks you could imagine he could suffer, and yet he overcame it. He persevered. He went on to do even better. But the young boy rarely persevered with anything. As soon as he got stuck, as soon as things got difficult, he would just give up and move on to something else. He preferred the easy path. And the key, really, to the difference between these two gentlemen is their mindset. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's workshop, is mindset. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at our own mindsets and trying to figure out how we can evaluate them, see how our actions are affecting our lives, especially when we face challenges or obstacles or difficulties. And then we'll talk about some ways that we can change our mindset if we don't like where it's taking us. And not just in the short term, but long term as well. And I'll talk a little bit later on about the importance of goals and our mindsets. So to kick us off, I'd like you to spend a little bit of time reflecting on some of your own experiences. So here's a little exercise to start. I want you to spend a minute or two thinking about a few things that you always wish that you could do, but you can't. Maybe you tried them once and it didn't really work out for you, or you never even thought to try because you just figured you'd never be any good at it. Perhaps you wanted to learn an instrument or learn a foreign language or something. So have a think about that and either write it down on a piece of paper or type it into a document, because we're going to come back to these later, and use the phrase, I cannot something. I cannot play an instrument. I cannot speak French. I cannot, whatever it might be. So take a second or two or a minute or two just to think about a few examples. And once you've got a couple of examples, feel free, if you like, to share them in the chat. Tell us what sorts of things you always wished you could do. I cannot sing. That's a great one. I love that one. Scuba diving. You can't scuba dive yet? Okay, that's good. We'll come back to that as well. I cannot knit socks. I can also not knit socks. I cannot be humorous. Come on, Gavin, I know you can be humorous. But okay, that's fine. That's good to start there. All right, so good. As long as you've got one or two things that you can think about, that's good enough for now. We'll come back to them later on. Well, for me, one of those things that I cannot do is drawing. The boy that I talked about earlier who kind of gave up on everything, yeah, that was me. I was talking about myself, and that's sort of how I was as a young boy. I would only focus really on the things that I was sort of already good at, and I would just give up on stuff that I wasn't very good at. And it became clear to me pretty early on in my life that drawing and art and those sorts of creative things, I was no good whatsoever. And so I just kind of gave up on it. I just never really pursued it. And as soon as I could stop that subject in school, I gave up on it. And just to show you how true that was, this is a self-portrait that I drew, not when I was 5, but when I was 35 years old. So not very talented, not very good as an artist. But then one day I was browsing through a local bookshop and I came across a book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. And it's not an exaggeration for me to say, folks, that this book changed my life. It literally changed my life. I would not be standing here talking to you right now if I had not picked up that book in that bookshop that day. Because that book by Betty Edwards taught me to do something that I knew for a fact was impossible. She taught me that I could, in fact, draw. This is a self-portrait of me that I drew after reading her book and after going through a lot of study and practice. And I want to be clear that I have not discovered some new talent. I have not discovered some hidden abilities. Well, I sort of have, but it's not that I've untapped really any kind of new talent in myself. What really happened was I changed my mindset. That book helped me change my mindset. And the concept of mindset that we're going to talk today comes to us from a Stanford psychologist, Professor Dr. Carol Dweck. And she has spent her career trying to understand people's mindsets, and in particular, how they handle failure, how they handle setbacks and challenges. And in her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, she describes that generally speaking, we find ourselves in one of two mindsets. Either we have a fixed mindset or we have a growth mindset. You may have heard of these terms already. And it's this mindset, either fixed or growth, that determines what happens when we're struggling and when we have setbacks. When we have a fixed mindset, we believe that our basic human characteristics, things like our intelligence or our talents or our personal qualities, are fixed. They're set in stone. Somehow at birth or early in our life, we are cast in iron and we cannot be changed. This is how Dr. Dweck describes it. She says that when we have a fixed mindset, we have it creates an urgency to prove ourselves over and over. Every situation calls for confirmation of our intelligence, personality, or character. Every situation is evaluated. Will I succeed or fail? Will I look smart or dumb? Will I be accepted or rejected? Will I feel like a winner or a loser? How many of you have ever had thoughts like that? How many of you have ever said these things to yourself at some point? I certainly have, many times. And the problem with a fixed mindset is that it can lead to a lot of undesirable behavior. It leads us to avoid challenges. We give up more easily when we get stuck. We avoid asking questions because we don't want to look stupid. We become threatened by the success of others. We avoid criticism or ignore it when we get it. We celebrate only when we win. We become overly concerned with how others perceive us, and we tend to have negative, backward-looking thoughts. That's a lot of negativity to be associated with a fixed mindset, and it gets worse because it doesn't just affect how we see ourselves, but it affects how we see other people too. After all, if we have a fixed mindset, if we don't believe that we can grow and change, then we don't believe that anybody can grow or change. And if nobody can grow and change, then nothing will ever get better. That's a very depressing thought. On the other hand, if we have a growth mindset, we do not, in fact, believe that our qualities are fixed or set in stone, but rather that we can change ourselves. We can learn to do new things and to become better. This is how Dr. Dweck describes it. The growth mindset is based on the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate based on your efforts. Although people differ in every which way, everyone can grow through application and experience. The passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even or especially when it's not going well, is the hallmark of a growth mindset. This is the mindset that allows people to thrive during some of the most challenging times in their lives. And so when we have a growth mindset, we have a different attitude towards life. We're more likely to embrace challenge, to persevere through difficulty, to ask questions, to seek criticism and feedback, to celebrate in other people's successes. We're more likely to celebrate effort and trying, not just winning. We focus more on how we see ourselves rather than on how other people see us, and we tend to have positive, forward-looking thoughts. Let's get through these. So with a growth mindset, we see failure as an obstacle to be overcome, not as a permanent roadblock that's forever going to be in our path. And a growth mindset really allows us to believe in ourselves and to believe in other people. And so it's a much more optimistic and positive state of mind. Now, it's important to note that our mindsets exists on a spectrum, and it's situational. We can have different mindsets depending on different situations or topics that we might be interested in. For example, we might have a fixed mindset about our intelligence. You might say to yourselves, well, I'm terrible at mathematics, and I always have been, and I always will be. But you might also say to yourself, well, there are some things that I can improve on, like, I don't know, public speaking, for example. Not one of you would have joined Toastmasters if you didn't somehow, somewhere deep down inside, believe that you could get better at public speaking. That's a growth mindset. And so you may find in different times of your life that you'll have more of a growth mindset in some things, more of a fixed mindset in others. And it's important to take a second to think about those areas of your life where you have had a growth mindset, because you can think back to those times when you find yourself struggling and you find yourself facing more of a fixed mindset situation. So hopefully at this point, you've convinced yourselves, or you've been convinced, that a growth mindset is a good thing to have, a useful thing to aspire to have. And maybe you're wondering how you can nurture or develop a growth mindset for yourself. Well, before you can change your mindset, you have to kind of know where your mindset is at any moment in time. And one of the best ways to do that is to pay attention to your inner monologue, the voice inside your head. Listen to what it's telling you and the words that it uses when you're facing a challenging situation. Pay attention to the language. Let's have a look at some examples. If you find yourself saying something like this, you can't change who you are, do you think that represents a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Type it into chat, growth or fixed. Fixed, yep, F is good. F is a good shortcut for fixed. Yeah, absolutely, that's a fixed mindset. What about this one? Life is so unfair. Fixed mindset, growth mindset. What do you think? Fixed, yep, F, definitely fixed mindset. What about this one? How can I improve? Is that fixed mindset or growth mindset? Yeah, it's growth mindset, absolutely. Yep. Can you help me? Is that something a fixed mindset would say or a growth mindset?
Growth.
What about this always happens to me? This always happens to me. Fixed or growth?
Fixed.
Fixed. Good. This is going to be a great challenge. I'm excited. Fixed or growth? Fixed. Growth.
Growth.
I'll never figure this out. Fixed. Growth.
Fix.
This is really hard, but it's not impossible. Fixed.
Growth.
Yeah. I'm a failure. Fixed.
Fix.
I'll keep trying until I get it right.
Growth.
So do you see there the words and the phrases and the sort of language that maybe you'd find yourself saying when you're struggling, when you're facing a setback? That can help you figure out what kind of mindset you have at that moment. All right. So I just want to pause there and see if there are any questions about mindsets so far before we move into something else.
So how and when do you set a growth mind?
How and when do you set it? How, can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, how do you set it up? Is it something that comes to you naturally? Is it a gift or something influenced by what? And what are
That's
the
what
obstacles?
Yep, that's a great question. That's exactly what we're going to talk about next. All right, thank you for that.
Okay.
Can changing our language change our mindset? Well, isn't that an interesting question? Let's see. How might you change your mindset? Well, if your language is reflecting your mindset, maybe your language can change your mindset too. What happened if you changed the words that you said to yourself when you were struggling and facing some kind of obstacle? There's actually one very simple word which can do exactly that. It can open the doors to all kinds of possibilities, and it can unlock you from that state of feeling like you're stuck and you can't go anywhere. And that word is yet. I can't draw yet. I can't sing yet. I didn't get a job yet. I don't have my DTM yet. Do you see how powerful that is? I can't scuba dive yet. It opens the door to possibility. It creates a future where the thing that you can't do today, maybe you could do tomorrow. That maybe you could achieve something that you thought was difficult. If you change your words, you can change your mindset. And with a growth mindset, these impossible seeming obstacles don't seem so impossible anymore. Changing your language can change your mindset, and just adding the word yet to the end of that sentence is maybe all it takes. But shifting your mindset and starting to think about the possible future is just the beginning. You still have to make it over those obstacles. You still have to be able to get to the other side of the wall. And so there's another quality which is going to be really important to you as you try to achieve your goals. You're going to need grit. The importance of grit as a personal quality was brought to us by another psychologist, Dr. Angela Duckworth. And much like Carol Dweck, Angela Duckworth has spent her career trying to figure out why some people are more likely to succeed than others. And in all of her research of West Point graduates, people entering the military, of students of every age from kindergarten through to high school and university students, she's found one quality in particular which is most commonly associated with achieving success. And it's this quality of grittiness. And she says that grit is our passion and perseverance for achieving long-term goals. She says that to be gritty is to keep putting one foot in front of the other. It's to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. It's to invest day after week after year in challenging practice. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and to rise 8. And most importantly of all, you can grow your grit. So being gritty, it's not glamorous, or it's not magic. There's no trick to it exactly. It's a choice. It's a choice to keep making progress every day, to keep trying, to take one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, even when things are difficult. And like I said, grit is something that you can grow. So in other words, if you think to yourself, you don't have grit, then just add yet to the end. And that's one way you can start to think about developing your own grit. Growth mindset and grit go really well together, because when you're facing a challenge or obstacle, a growth mindset will help you overcome it. A growth mindset will give you that belief that you can get to the other side. And it's grit that's going to help you to get there, to put one foot in front of the other, to start to climb that ladder and to keep going until you succeed. So grit and a growth mindset are a very powerful combination together. But for them to work really well, they need to be used purposefully. Remember, Angela Duckworth said that grit is about achieving purposeful goals. Well, we need to then figure out, what does she mean by purposeful goals? Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the concept of a goal. And those of you who have studied Brian Tracy's work or listened to business experts or management experts or personal coaches, professional coaches, they'll tell you that goals need to have really three things. They need to be specific, they need to be measurable, and they need to be time-bound. In other words, they need to be specific. You have to know exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve. They need to be measurable so that you can tell whether or not you have achieved it. And they have to be time-bound. You need to give yourself some time limit for trying to achieve a goal. And so here's a goal that I might have had. By Thanksgiving, I want to draw a recognizable portrait. Well, that seems pretty straightforward, right? I mean, that seems like a good goal. By Thanksgiving, I've set my time limit. I want to draw a recognizable portrait. If I draw a portrait and show it to someone and they recognize who it is, I have succeeded my goal. So that is specific and it's measurable and it's time-bound. But it's not a purposeful goal. We'll get to that shortly, but it's not yet a purposeful goal. It's a place to start. So what I'd like you to do now is to think about some goals for yourself. Going back to the thing that you cannot do, try writing a goal for achieving it and use that same format. Give yourself some deadline. Don't worry too much about whether it's a realistic deadline or not. Just give yourself some kind of deadline where you want to achieve it by, and write down the thing that you want to achieve. By next summer, I want to learn how to scuba dive. By Christmas, I want to be able to sing a Christmas carol, whatever it might be. So write down for yourself. And if you want to share it in the chat, please write it in the chat as well. Gavin wants to have an 8-pack by October 18th. You could just go to Safeway and buy one. What are you talking about? My Fitbit wants me to walk 10 steps by midnight every day. Yeah, that's a good one. By December, I want to finish my pathway. That's a good goal. I like that. Hang has a keg. Yep. I may have a spare barrel as well. Any other goals that people might have for themselves? If you want to share, that's fine. If you don't have to share. All right. By May 1st, I want to complete all 11 paths. Wow, Gavin, that's an ambitious goal. That's an ambitious goal, but I like it. Specific, measurable, time-bound. All right, so most of you now hopefully have some kind of goal that you want to achieve. And that's fine, that's a good place to start. But what we're trying to get to is this idea of a purposeful goal. So now I want you to add something to the end of the goal that you just wrote. I want you to add a reason. Add the reason why you want to achieve that goal. And the reason is really important because it's the reason that's going to provide a source of motivation for you when things get tough. It's going to help you find the grittiness that you'll need to achieve that goal. And it's the reason that turns an ordinary goal into a purposeful one. So do that now. Add the why to the end of your goal. Why is it that you want to finish your pathway by December? Why is it that you want to complete all 11 paths by May? Why is it that you want to get an 8-pack, Gavin? So think about why it is and add that to the end of your goal. Why is it important to you? And if you want to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. By May 1st, I want to complete all my 11 paths because then I can handle diverse styles of communication in business world in English. Very nice. By December, I want to finish my pathway because my job and my self-confidence depends on it. Very good. I love it. This idea of having a why is super important. As Viktor Frankl said, those who have a why can bear almost any how. And so going back to me for a second, why was it so important that I learned to draw, this thing that I'd never been able to do since I was a child?
Stewart.
Why did I set myself this goal of learning to draw by Thanksgiving? Well, the reason is because I wanted to change my job. I wanted to be a designer. And it's not easy to be a designer if you really have no idea how to draw. And so this now gave me a purpose. My goal wasn't just something that I wanted to achieve because it was a goal that I wanted to achieve because I had a purpose in mind. I wanted to become a designer. And so when things got stuck, when things got tough, I could focus on that goal of becoming a designer. But we're not done yet. We can go deeper. I'm sure most of you have done the exercise of the 5 whys, and you can keep adding more whys to the end of your goal. Why was it that I wanted to become a designer? Well, when I sat down and thought about it, I realized it was because I had seen my mother struggle so much with new technology, whether it was the microwave or the TV or a computer or her phone. Everything just seemed so hard for her to use. And the more that I looked around, the more I saw other people struggling as well. And I love technology. In fact, I started off my career as a software engineer, making new technology. But I realized that the technology that I and many other people was making just was hard to use for people. And so for that reason, I wanted to be a designer so that I could make technology more accessible for more people. But I didn't have to stop there. I could keep asking the same question, but why? Why is that important? Well, because I want to make people's lives better. And so as I dig more into the why, I come up with these bigger and bigger reasons for doing what it is that I want to do. And if you take that far enough, maybe you even get to kind of a life purpose. And once you can get to that point, you can draw a line between the thing that you want to do now, learning to draw, learning to sing, completing a path, to something much bigger that's going to fulfill many more things in your life. Let me show you a little bit about what I mean. You can think of goals as kind of being in a hierarchy, with smaller goals leading to bigger goals, leading to even bigger goals at the top. And that big goal at the top is kind of like your life purpose. It drives everything you do. Everything in your life orients around that goal. So for example, as I start at the bottom and I say, well, I want to learn to draw, then I can go up one level and I can say, well, that's because I want to become a designer. And when I'm there, I can go up another level and say, well, that's because I want to make people's lives better. And so as you dig deeper into your why, you come up with these bigger goals. And that's pretty powerful. But do you notice on this diagram, there are some holes, there are some empty spots where more goals could go. And that's important because then you can start to fill in these other goals that you might have that can help you achieve your big life purpose. And these goals at the bottom, the lower level goals, can be really diverse. There are lots of little goals you can have that feed up to the bigger ones. And so this idea of having a kind of hierarchy of goals with a big life purpose at the top and then other goals underneath can help you just see how everything in your life fits together. It can even help you spot connections between things that maybe you didn't think about. Like if writing blogs can help me become a designer, and writing to people in prison who've been incarcerated, who don't have anyone outside of the world, anyone in the outside world to contact them, there's writing as a connection between those two things. And so if I focus on my writing skills, that serves two goals. And those two goals serve two different goals, but they both end up at the same place of helping to make people's lives better. The other nice thing about this goal hierarchy is that it can help you figure out if you're spending your time on the right things. In our daily lives, there are all kinds of things that we want to do. I'm constantly distracted by cool new things that maybe I want to go and learn about, or that I maybe want to spend some time investigating, but there's only so much time in the day about whether we're spending it on our big priorities, whether we're really spending it wisely. And when you think about some new thing that you want to go and do, some new goal that you might have for yourself, it's easy to see whether it really fits in with that big life purpose. I very much would love to learn the violin. I think that would be pretty interesting. But is it going to help me achieve my life purpose in some way? Does me learning the violin help make the world a better place in some way? It might, and maybe it does for you. Maybe that makes sense for you. But for me, at least right now, it doesn't. And so rather than spending time on doing that just now, I can put that energy into things that I know are going to feed up to my big purpose. We're all very busy in our lives, and deciding what not to do is just as important, maybe even more important than deciding what we are going to do. And so these goals, big ones and small ones, they give us the purpose that will drive our lives. And when you have that purpose, then overcoming obstacles becomes a little bit easier. When you spend every moment of your life wondering how you can fulfill your big why, your big life goal, you'll be looking forwards. You're already starting to think to the future. You're starting to think optimistically about how you can get to that future. And that's growth mindset thinking. And then having those big goals that are just on the other side of that wall, just one obstacle away before you can start to achieve the things that you really want to achieve. That's going to be your source of inspiration and motivation to keep persevering when things are tough, to develop that grit that's going to help you achieve what it is that you want to achieve. There's just one last piece to cover before we finish up here. So I just want to pause to see if there are any questions about goals, life purposes, how goals and growth mindset and grittiness all fit in together with each other. If you have a question, you can say it out loud or type it into the chat, either way. I don't know how scuba diving fits into my life goal. Should I put it off for now? Well, I mean, that's the question that you'd have to answer for yourself. I suppose that would depend on what are your life's goals. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you only have like one big life goal. You may have more than one. In her book, if you're interested, you should go and read Angela Duckworth's book about grit, because she talks about goals in there as well. And she herself talks about the struggle of having competing big goals. And she says that for her, there's a big goal around her career that she's shooting for, but she also has a big family goal as well. And so she herself wonders how those two things can fit together. So I'm not saying it's an easy or perfect system, but I'm just encouraging you to think about what it is really in life that you're trying to achieve and how the little things that you want to do first can help you get there. When would something like learning the violin fit into your life? Curious, yeah. So an example for you. Well, that's what I have to figure out. There may come a point at which learning to play the violin would fit into some bigger goal. And it may be one of those big goals is more about my own fulfillment in some way. I haven't really thought about that as a goal too much, about things that I might want to do just for my own self, just for my own benefit. But these are big questions that we should be thinking about for ourselves. What are our values? What do we really care about? And what are we doing with our time here on this planet in this lifetime? And, so thinking a little bit about how all the stuff that you do today and all the things that you want to do, how they fit together and what they mean and where they might take you in your life and your journey. That's really what this is about, just encouraging you to think about that a little bit. What if I don't have goals, but I just want to live? Well, that's a perfectly good goal as well. Again, I'm not telling you what your goals should be or what they should look like. I just want you to be thinking about them. Where does a person's goals come from? How to assess our life goal? How to set an appropriate goal? Yeah, these are all very big questions. So yeah, I just would say spend some time thinking about all of these goals and how they fit together, which is, I suppose, probably the topic of another presentation or another workshop. And I'm sure there are very good people out there to talk more about goal setting in life. But this is the theme that I'm trying to get to here, is that these goals, once you've thought about them and you have an idea of what they are today, of course, goals can change. But once you know what your goals are today, that's going to be the source of motivation for overcoming the obstacles between where you are right now and the goals that you want to achieve. All right. So take a moment, if you would, and go back to your goals that you just started to think about. I had asked you to add one reason why. I'd like you to spend just a couple of minutes trying to dig a little bit deeper and asking yourself a few more whys. Why is it that you want to learn to scuba dive? And once you've got an answer to that, why do you want to do that thing? And why is that thing important? So go through that process a few times, ask yourself why a few times, and see where you get to. And if you want to share in chats, then please do, but at least write it down for yourself. Did anyone come up with a big why that they'd like to share? It's not easy to do in a few minutes, I understand. But if you did come up with one, couldn't chat. All right. By December, I want to finish my pathway because my job and self-confidence depends on it. That was great. That was a good place to start. Because I had poor grammar and speaking skills, because I was a bad communicator and listener, because I want to be a better person overall. All right, see, so that's starting to think about how these things all relate and how they build on top of each other. I want to learn to scuba dive because it allows me the freedom to explore spaces that have been inaccessible to me, and the freedom and exploration are important to me. I love it. Exactly. So scuba diving lets you see more of the world, and you love to see more of the world. That's something that's important to you. And so again, I would say, think again about why is it that exploring the world is important to you? Is there something bigger behind that? So that's one exercise that you can continue for sure in your own time. And this is not something that will probably be done overnight for you. It may take a while, months, maybe even years before you really figure it out, and that's okay. But for the purposes of this workshop, we're going to head in the other direction for a second. You've gone all the way up to your life purpose, or you've started to think that far ahead. But now let's think back down the other way. By Thanksgiving, I want to draw a recognizable portrait because I want to be a designer, because I want technology to be accessible to all, because I want the world to struggle less, I want to help people. But how am I going to get there? What do I need to do? Well, you need to start somewhere. Perseverance and grit is all about taking one step at a time. And it doesn't really matter how small that step is. Any step is a good step in the right direction. So start thinking about what you could do to get to your goal. For example, for me, I picked up that book and I started reading Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And then I practiced drawing a finger. It was the first thing that I drew in one of the early chapters was a finger. And then I drew a whole hand. And then I drew a face. And then I tried to draw a face that was recognizable. And so each step gets me a little bit closer to the goal. And of course, you can break that down even further. If I was reading the book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, I could have had a goal to read 10 pages in a day. And even then, I could have broken that down into, I want to read for a solid hour every day. And even with that, I can break that down to saying, I want to read for at least 20 minutes while I have my coffee. And so once you've kind of drilled the other way down, you can now see this arc that goes from taking one step today that takes you all the way through a whole bunch of goals until you're doing something that means an awful lot to you. And that makes that little step much easier to take. Once you know that it's going to take you to the top of a mountain that you've always wanted to climb, taking that first step and then the next step and then the next step and the next step becomes just a little bit easier. So do that for yourselves now. For the goals that you have set yourself, especially if it's for something that you've never really done before, you've never really thought how you're going to do it, think about what you could do tomorrow. The first little step that you could take that would help you get closer to your goal. And then maybe think about what the step after that might be and what the step after that might be. Did anyone come up with a good first or second step that they want to take to climb their mountain? Yeah, perfect. Look up scuba diving instructors and see what the basics, just see how you get started. Yeah. So one little step that you can take tomorrow can lead you to the bottom of some fabulous ocean. Maybe, who knows, maybe this year, maybe next year. All right, Gavin, well, that's great. So what are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to do tomorrow to get your 8-pack? Another book that I recommend reading, I don't have a copy of the picture for the presentation, but you might want to read Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg. It's a very good book about talking how to break down these big goals into small habits that you can do easily and quickly and routinely. And that's sort of the important thing, is making progress every day on these things. And an interesting thing about B.J. Fogg is that he's a professor and he gives presentations and keynotes and TED Talks, but he had a pretty severe speech impediment early in life. In fact, to this day, that he had to work to overcome. And for years, he really didn't say much at all because of this speech impediment he had. And even when he was negotiating with Amazon for the rights to read his own book, to make the audiobook version of his book with him as the narrator, Amazon said no. They didn't want him to do it because of his speech impediment. And so BJ Fogg went and found a coach and spent months working with this voice coach on improving his voice so that he could convince Amazon to let him read his own audiobook, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And it's exactly the sort of thing that Toastmasters, that's the sort of thing we think about in Toastmasters. How can we improve ourselves? All right, so good stuff. You've thought about big goals, you've thought about little goals, you've thought about steps you can take to get towards those goals. Let's get back to mindset and grit then. And again, as you start working towards your goals, broadly speaking, you're going to find yourselves sort of in one of two places. Either you're struggling or you're succeeding. And if you find yourself struggling, then here's what you need to do. First, check for a fixed mindset. See if you are in the fixed mindset state of mind. Listen to the words inside your head. Are you telling yourself that you can't do something? Are you giving up on yourself? Try celebrating efforts. Add yet to the end of your sentence and celebrate the effort you've put in so far. Make a promise to yourself to persevere, to try again tomorrow, even if today isn't working out very well. One of my favorite quotes is, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the small voice saying, I'll try again tomorrow." I think that's a fabulous way of thinking about it, that you just, even if today isn't working out, tomorrow's a new day and you can try again tomorrow. And reflect on your goals. If things are going hard and you're not sure why you're doing something, or you're not sure if you even should be doing it, go back and think about those goals and think about where it is that you're trying to get to. And maybe you'll find your source of inspiration there. But even if things are going well and you're succeeding, still take that time to reflect. If things are going well, acknowledge your growth mindset that's helped you to get that far. Notice the words that you use when things are going well and hang on to those words. Make a note of them, write them down. Celebrate your efforts. Celebrate the fact that you got to that point, but also the effort that you put in to get there. Promise to persevere just as before. Even though things are going well, make that promise every day, make that commitment every day to keep moving forward. And reflect on your goals again. When things are going well, it's just as important to make sure that it's still all fitting in with where you're trying to get to and what you're trying to achieve. So to summarize, we have one of two mindsets, either a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. When we have a fixed mindset, we believe that our traits, our qualities, who we are, is fixed and unchangeable, and we're stuck with it for life. But when we have a growth mindset, we believe that we can change. We believe that our fundamental character, our traits, our qualities are flexible, and that if we put in the effort and the time, we can change ourselves. We need to pay attention to the words that we use to figure out whether our mindset is fixed or in growth state at any moment, and yet can help shift you from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset and open the door to a possible future where you can achieve the thing that you're trying to achieve. Grit is what's going to help you persevere and get over the struggles that you'll inevitably face, and that your grit is going to be driven by your passion and your perseverance for these big goals, this life purpose that you're trying to achieve. And that means you need to take steps every day. Take a step every day towards achieving your goals, and evaluate every day whether you're getting closer or further away, or whether or not you need to change your goals and take a different direction. And celebrate your efforts, whether things are going well or not. Be sure to acknowledge the fact that you've put in the hard work and that you've learned something or gained something from it. and promise yourself that you will persevere even when things are going not so well. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. I hope this was useful to you. I hope you've had a chance to reflect a little bit on the things that you're trying to achieve, your own mindset, your goals, where you're heading in life, and you'll start to think about how all these things can tie together. I am available for questions for a few minutes. I know we're pretty close to the end of the meeting here, but if there are any questions now, I'm happy to take them. If